Good day, everyone, and thanks for joining us on this webinar, Smallholder Profitability, the role of weather forecasts in making impact. I am Ikechukwu Kalu, the Content and Inbound Marketing Lead at Ignitia, and I'll be your moderator for today. Before we go on, let me recognize the people we have here. Thank you, Chris. Thanks for joining in, Chris. Ed, we see you. Jessica, Martin, Muammar, Andrew, and of course the speaker, Seth. Before we go into this webinar, I crave your indulgence to give a grace of about 5 minutes to allow our other guests from around the world join in on this webinar. Thank you. Also, while we wait, it is important to know that this webinar was put together to share knowledge on how the provision of accurate weather information empowers smallholder farmers to improve their livelihoods. In a few minutes, our speaker, Seth Clements, will be taking us through the role of weather forecasting making impact for smallholder farmers. Also, to ensure a noiseless experience for everyone attending this webinar, we will be muting all microphones except the speakers. Should you have any question halfway through the webinar, kindly note it down for the Q&A session or drop it in the comments section and it will be attended to when we get to the question and answer segment. We encourage you to ask your questions and make your contributions in the comments section. I think we have 3 more minutes before we get into the webinar, just to let others join in. Thanks for being here and thanks for your indulgence. Okay, I think that's about the much time we can give for others to join in. We need to kick off now. But before that, let's get to know our facilitator for today, Seth Clements. Seth currently serves as the Project Implementation Officer at Ignitia. He's a development professional well experienced in developing real solutions to real problems. He's passionate about fighting for an equal world where everyone has equal access to opportunities and amenities. And when he's not going about international development, Seth has a soft spot for the Ewe language, the predominant local language of Ghana's Volta region. He always has space in his tummy for Ghanaian food and his ears never get tired of contemporary Ghanaian and Nigerian music. Without much ado, Seth, thanks for joining us today.
All right, thank you very much for that introduction, Ike. So everyone, welcome to this webinar. I'll be glad to guide you through this session on smallholder profitability, the role of weather forecasts in making impact. And as Ike mentioned prior to the start, if you have any questions, please feel free to note them, write them in the chat, and we will get to those questions at the end as we have set aside some time for a question and answer session. So let us get started here. I've just added an overview of the webinar, the different topics that I will take you through today. So first, we will go through Ignitia's theory of change. We'll discuss not only what we believe, but also data that we've collected and evaluated on how our forecasts ultimately positively impact the lives of smallholder farmers. After this, we will go into how farmers find value in weather forecasts. And here we will dive into some of this evidence that has been collected directly from farmers and that explain how farmers truly find value in the forecast and how they also utilize the weather forecasts in their activities. After this, we'll look more deeply into this evidence, looking at how farmers experience improved outcomes. We'll walk through some of the key evidence we have, and specifically focus on how farmers have reported yield improvements after using our forecasts. And after this, we'll go a bit deeper into a few of our most recent impact evaluations that we've conducted, sharing some background information and highlighting key results and findings. And finally, we will talk about how and why Ignitia regularly evaluates impact. We'll discuss kind of the purpose of why we collect this data, why we evaluate it, why we've made this a part of our regular operations, and a bit about how we actually go about doing this. And then finally, we will have a question and answer session where we can address any questions, comments that you may have. So let us get started. So we'll start here with Ignitia's theory of change, the steps to delivering impact. Okay, so we start with the provision of weather forecasts. Okay, then the provision of weather forecasts empowers farmers to make decisions and improve their farming practices. This can enable farmers to experience improved outcomes. And when these outcomes are sustainable, then you can see improved farmer livelihoods. So when we talk about the provision of weather forecasts, our inputs, these forecasts that we have are specifically designed for accuracy in tropical climates. Basically, this helps us helps farmers to meet a need that really has not been so well addressed. Our forecasts are specifically designed for accuracy in tropical climates, whereas most other weather forecasts are not able to predict rainfall and evaluate the smaller and rapidly forming weather systems that are inherent to tropical climates. Our forecasts are also readily understandable. They've been designed based on numerous trials and are reliant on some keywords to effectively communicate weather forecast information, even to individuals that may have low literacy levels. And we also make our forecasts available currently in 4 different languages. And then our forecast delivery, it's reliable. It only requires network access as our forecasts are sent via SMS. So this means that no data connection is required. Farmers do not need smartphones to receive forecasts. As long as they can receive SMS, as long as they can receive text messages, they can receive our forecasts to their phones every day. So as long as they can make or receive phone calls, they can receive these forecasts. And moreover, our forecasts are additionally designed to be accurate for a farmer's specific GPS location. And this helps to ensure accuracy of forecasts, as location precision is additionally important for tropical climates where we have much smaller and much more quickly forming weather systems that are difficult to predict if you don't have more precise location information, and if you don't have models that are built to predict weather for these systems. So with our accessibility of our forecasts, this empowers farmers to make decisions on their farms and ultimately improve their farming practices. So the forecasts enable farmers to plan their activities based on the forecasts that they receive throughout the farming seasons. So from the timing of land preparation, sowing, fertilizer and pesticide application, all the way to harvesting and even post-harvest activities, such as drying and even selling of crops, the forecasts enable farmers to make more informed decisions. So they can basically plan their activities around rainfall. And we will look more deeply into how farmers actually make these decisions later in this session. But these informed decisions ultimately can translate into improved farming outcomes. So some examples of these outcomes that we've observed include improved crop yields, reduction in farming costs due to the more efficient use of labor, machinery, and inputs such as fertilizer and pesticides. Farmers have also reported a reduction in post-harvest loss due to optimal timing of harvest, and in addition to enhanced drying and storage practices. And this can also lead to the production of higher quality crops, which farmers can sell at higher prices. And then when these outcomes can become sustainable, when farmers receive these forecasts over a period of multiple seasons, we can start to see true impact in the form of enhanced farmer livelihoods. So farmers are able to improve their livelihoods through increased profits, and these increased profits enable investment into areas such as schooling, paying for household expenses, and even improving their farm capacity by purchasing more land or purchasing equipment and machinery, by perhaps purchasing livestock. Additionally, farmers are able to improve their resilience against the harmful impacts of climate change. So one thing that is well established right now is that climate change is ultimately causing higher levels of variability in the rainy seasons in the tropics, which of course lowers the predictability of these rains and makes it more difficult for farmers, especially rain-fed farmers, to plan their farming activities, and ultimately can lead to devastating results such as the washing away of inputs, the destruction of harvested crops. And the forecasts enable farmers to mitigate some of these risks by being more prepared for rainfall and being able to plan based on the information in these forecasts. And additionally, we can also see improved stability of agricultural value chains. As farmers become more resilient to adverse weather conditions and can properly plan around weather conditions, they can see less seasonal variability in crop production, especially related to rainfall. So now we will talk about how farmers actually find value in the weather forecast. In this part, we will dive into some of the actual data that we've collected directly from farmers about their perceptions of the forecast and how they're able to leverage the information in the weather forecast to take actionable decisions on the farm. So farmers ultimately have found Ignitia's forecasts to be valuable, reliable, and accurate. We have repeatedly observed that farmers grow to trust and rely on the weather forecasts, ultimately utilizing the weather information to take key decisions on the farm. So some examples of this include satisfaction. So we often will ask general questions about farmer satisfaction. And based on one of the evaluations that have been conducted, 90.2% of farmers surveyed reported satisfaction with the provision of Ignitia's forecasts. Additionally, 75% of farmers reported that forecasts are either often or always accurate. This was based on a sliding scale where farmers were able to choose whether forecasts were never accurate, rarely accurate, sometimes accurate, often accurate, or always accurate. Additionally, farmers actually share and recommend the use of the forecast, indicating a high level of trust. 82.1% of farmers share the forecast with others in their communities regularly. Some even become a trusted source of information that their community members, their friends, their family will regularly come to for this information. And additionally, 93.4% of farmers say that they would recommend the use of the forecast to their friends and family. So we've also asked about the willingness to pay for the forecast. So this question was asked after farmers were provided with fully subsidized forecasts for a full farming season as part of a project. So what we saw was that 80.2% of farmers said that they would either probably or definitely be willing to pay for the weather forecast after receiving for a season. And this is an important indication that farmers truly do find value in the forecast. And in addition to this question, farmers were asked about their approximation of the cost for a single forecast. And so this question was asked in northern Nigeria. And the median estimation for this was about 10 naira, which is approximately what a subscription would cost a farmer per forecast, depending on the plan that they choose, provided that they subscribe through a mobile network operator. So this one, it's a very important indication that not only projects are a great way to familiarize farmers with the forecast, and that farmers do grow to value and trust the forecast, but that sustainability is very realistic, that farmers would truly be willing to pay for the forecast after they receive subsidized forecasts. Finally, between 87.9% and 95% of farmers report actually making changes to their farming practices based on the weather information that they receive on their phones. So basically, this means that farmers have, for example, reported that they use the weather forecast to better plan their activities. And this information basically empowers farmers to be able to make improved decisions on their farms. And we'll take a much more close look at how this is actually done in this next slide. So here we'll take a look at how farmers actually utilize weather forecast information in their farming activities. So what we have seen is that farmers will utilize this information and actually make it a key aspect of their decision-making process throughout the farming process. So right from land preparation and sowing through fertilizer and pesticide application, all the way to harvesting and outbound logistics and even selling. Farmers will utilize the forecast information to make better decisions and ultimately see greater efficiency in their farming practices. So we'll first take a look at land preparation and sowing. So ultimately, farmers save time and limit the need for seed replanting by using the forecasts in their activities and using the forecast to effectively plan. So in terms of land preparation, we've seen that 42.7% of farmers reported that the forecast actually helped to improve their land preparation activities by planning their clearing, tilling, and harrowing around forecasted rainfall, reducing their time spent on the farm, reducing their labor inputs, and ultimately allowing for a more efficient use of time and labor. We've also seen that farmers do rely on the forecasts for the sowing of seeds. Between 62.9% and 83.4% of farmers reported to have changed their sowing practices by either timing their sowing for the optimal conditions or by selecting the most appropriate variety of seeds for the season. So in terms of timing their sowing for the optimal conditions, what farmers will do is first, they will make sure that the conditions are right. You don't want to sow your seeds when the soil is completely dry, right? But again, you also do not want to sow your seeds when there's heavy rainfall predicted, because that can wash away the seeds, and then they have to not only plant again, but they also may even have to purchase more seeds. So this helps them save costs in terms of actually avoiding the need to replant, as well as saving time. Additionally, farmers are able to utilize our seasonal and monthly forecasts, which give a more long range forecast for rainfall and temperature to determine how the conditions will be for the season. So they can select a variety of seed that may be more quick to mature if the rainy season may be short. They can also choose a variety of seed that may require more water if there's supposed to be more rainfall during the season. So there are a few different ways that farmers actually are able to utilize these longer term forecasts to select not only the most appropriate variety of seed, but also to even choose the type of crops that they might grow for a given season. So next we will look at fertilizer and pesticide application and how farmers are able to utilize the forecasts to improve their application of fertilizer and pesticides. So by minimizing the wastage of fertilizer and pesticides, farmers ultimately are able to improve their efficiency and lower their costs. So when it comes to fertilizer application, between 83% and 89% of farmers report making changes based on the forecasts they receive from Ignitia. These forecasts help them to time the application for optimal conditions for nutrient uptake, and also to avoid heavy rainfall that can cause runoff, which not only has implications in terms of time that would be required for reapplication that may have implications in terms of labor costs, in terms of costs of the actual fertilizer, but also the environmental costs of fertilizer runoff, which of course, if it goes into, for example, bodies of water, it can have some negative implications on the ecosystem. So not only helping farmers to save time, save money, save on labor costs, but also it can help reduce environmental risks. And then we see similar types of behavior in pesticide application. Between 86 and 97% of farmers that do apply pesticides reported to change how they apply pesticides. And they do this by planning their application, their spraying of pesticides around forecasted rainfall to prevent chemicals from being washed away or to prevent chemicals from being blown away when they spray. And also to ensure that there are correct moisture levels to enhance the efficacy of these chemicals, to ensure that they're actually being utilized and that they're effectively preventing certain pests or certain weeds from impacting the growth of their crops. And then finally, we see that farmers also report utilizing the forecast in their harvesting and post-harvest activities. So the forecasts have enabled farmers to improve their planning of harvesting and post-harvest activities to both improve crop quality and reduce their post-harvest loss. So in terms of actually harvesting, between 76 to 91% of farmers reported to use forecasts to time their harvesting activities. The major way that farmers have reported to time their harvesting around the forecast information is to avoid predicted rainfall, to ultimately limit crop spoilage, and also to utilize the monthly and seasonal forecast to identify the most ideal harvesting window so that they can make the proper preparations for the timing of their harvesting. Farmers also report to utilize the forecasts in their storage and drying of crops. So about 60.5% of farmers reported that the forecast helped them to know when harvested crops should be stored and also when they can dry the crops under the sun, limiting loss that can come when, for example, crops are being dried out in the sun and then rain comes and can cause earlier spoilage of crops and can ultimately even destroy some crops. So it enables farmers to keep their harvested crops more fresh. And ultimately, this also helps them in terms of selling. So 46.8% of farmers reported that the forecast also improved their ability to sell their crops. So this can come in a few different ways. So some have reported that the forecasts inform them about when to transport the crops to sell at the markets. And others have said that the forecasts have ultimately helped to improve the quality of the produce that they sell, which ends up leading to higher prices that they can sell their crops for. So as we can see here, the forecasts are used by farmers throughout the farming cycle. Farmers report to use it from the very beginning when it comes to land preparation, all the way to selling their crops. And they ultimately report higher levels of efficiency in terms of their activities by saving time, saving costs, better use of seeds and inputs such as fertilizers and pesticides. So when farmers are able to utilize these forecast information in their farming activities, this can ultimately lead to improved outcomes. Okay, of course, they wouldn't be making these changes if there wasn't a tangible benefit. But what we have seen is that that farmers do report tangible benefits through the implementation of these forecasts into their activities. So now we'll look at some of the evidence we have of improved outcomes. So we'll specifically take a look at the evidence that farmers have reported of yield improvements and their correlation with farmers' reports of taking specific actions that we just mentioned in their farms through the utilization of the weather forecast information. So first we'll look at how farmers have reported improvements in yields after both receiving and using weather forecasts. So what we can see here are the yields reported by farmers in the season preceding their receipt of weather forecasts. Okay, so what we typically will do is we'll ask farmers about their production of crops and the land area for the season in which they had just received and used the forecast, as well as for the season before they received the forecast. So right here, what you're seeing is the season before receiving the forecast, essentially the baseline. So what we have to note is that this yield information has been controlled for some changes in farming practices, such as multi-cropping, application of fertilizer, application of pesticides. So what this means is that, for example, any farmer for these crops that did not apply fertilizer in the pre-forecast season, but then applied fertilizer in the season in which they received forecasts, they are not included here because that's a pretty serious change that can of course conflict with the results. So this is one way that, you know, despite having a drawback of using a before after estimation of yields, this is one way that we do attempt to control for other factors aside from the use of the forecasts. Okay, so when we look here, we see rice in the season before receiving the forecast. Farmers reported an average yield of about 1,500 kilograms per hectare. Okay, in the season in which they utilized the weather forecast, farmers reported a yield of 2,800 kilos per hectare. So this represented an 88.3% increase in yield. So next we can take a look at sorghum. Sorghum also saw about a 1,500 kilograms per hectare yield in the season prior to receiving forecasts. And do note that this before and after, they all are for the same exact group of farmers. So for example, for the rice, that 1,500 kilos per hectare, those are the same farmers as the 2,800 kilos per hectare. So now going to sorghum, right? We have the 1,500 kilos per hectare before using ISCA, and then after. So in the season in which they did receive forecasts, these same farmers saw a yield of about 2,280 kilos per hectare, representing a yield increase of about 48%. Moving to groundnut. In the season preceding the receipt of weather forecasts, farmers reported a yield of 758 kilos per hectare. And in the season after receiving the weather forecasts, they reported a yield of about 1,000 kilos per hectare, representing a yield increase of 37.6%. Going to maize, farmers reported a before yield of about 2,500 kilos per hectare. And after, they reported a yield of about 3,500 kilos per hectare, representing a 35% yield increase. And finally, we will go to cassava. In the season preceding receipt of weather forecasts, farmers reported a yield of about 3,000 kilos per hectare. And in the season in which they did receive weather forecasts, they reported a yield of about 3,750 kilos per hectare, representing a 26% yield increase. So what we have seen here, of course, this isn't saying that the weather forecast directly caused this yield increase. Okay, that's not what we're saying here. What we are saying is that this is what was observed from the pre-weather forecast season to the season in which farmers received the weather forecast. Of course, there are many different reasons why these yields can increase, one of which can be the use of the weather forecast. However, we are not saying that, we're not attributing these yield increases directly to the weather forecast. So that is one important thing to note. So now we can see that farmers experience these yield increases. Next, we will take a deeper look into some of these yield improvements and see how they are actually correlated with some behavior change, some actual implementation of the weather forecast into farmers' activities. So in multiple evaluations that have been conducted, in this case, evaluations in both Nigeria and Ghana, farmers have been observed to experience larger and more frequent improvements in yields when they more deeply integrate the weather forecasts into their farming practices. So if we think back to the slide on how farmers utilize the forecast in their farming activities, the one where we talked about land preparation and sowing, fertilizer and pesticide application, as well as harvesting and post-harvest activities. We talked about the percent of farmers that made certain changes. Okay, so for example, a change in pesticide application, a farmer who reported that they utilized the forecast to plan when they apply their pesticides, that would be an example of a single change in their farming practices. So here we look at the number of changes and how these number of changes are correlated to both magnitude of yield increase and also prevalence of yield increase. Okay, so the first example we have is for rice. Okay, rice farmers reported more than 5 changes to their farming practices through the use of the weather forecast, experienced yields that were 3 times greater, and also were 36% more likely to experience a yield improvement at all. Going to sorghum farmers that reported making more than 3 of these changes to their farming practices through the use of the weather forecast in terms of helping them plan their activities, experienced an 8 times greater increase in yield and were 37% more likely to experience any yield improvement at all. So these sorghum farmers, those who made more than 3 changes experienced yield increases of 49.4%, whereas those who made 3 or less only experienced an average yield improvement of 5.5%. Finally, we can take a look at maize. Maize farmers have reported at least 3 of these changes to their farming practices through the implementation of the weather forecast in their decision making, experienced a 2 times improvement in yield. So the maize farmers that did make at least 3 changes reported a yield increase of just under 84%, whereas farmers who made less than 3 changes reported a yield increase of about 35%. So here it's definitely not a perfect way to evaluate how these decisions based on the forecasts do create impact. However, we have observed and repeatedly observed these types of correlations where more changes in a farmer's activities is correlated with larger and more frequent yield improvements. So next we'll take a look at a few of these impact evaluations that have been carried out, including the 2 that we've relied heavily on for much of this data that we've gone through to this point. So we'll examine the farmers' usage of the weather forecast and the benefits that they've reported after using the forecast, some of the key findings from these evaluations, and a bit of an overview about these evaluations in general. Okay, so here we'll take a look at 3 different recent impact evaluations. So we can start on the left here with our impact evaluation in Burkina Faso. This was part of a project with GIZ and ProCiv. This project took place in 2019 and involved about 3,000 farmers in Western Burkina Faso. In this evaluation, about 40 farmers were surveyed who had been receiving the weather forecast, and this evaluation was conducted entirely by GIZ and their local partners. So the major crops that were evaluated here were maize, cotton, sesame, and rice. So just to go over some of the key results here. Farmers reported that forecast information informed their farming practices, with 67% making changes to their land preparation practices, 85% utilizing the forecast to time their sowing activities, 97% reporting that the forecast informed them on when to apply their fertilizer and pesticides, and 85% reported changes in weed control and when and how to weed, and 82% also uses the forecast in terms of harvesting and drying of their crops. So as we can see here, there was a high level of adoption of the forecast into farmers' activities. So one of the major findings from this evaluation was reduction in input usage. So farmers reported reductions in both fertilizer and pesticide usage. So when we look at fertilizer usage, farmers reported a 14% reduction in fertilizer usage for cotton. They reported a 31% reduction in fertilizer usage for maize, 29% reduction for rice, and 20% for sesame. Additionally, they reported reductions in pesticide usage, reporting reductions of 33% for cotton, 40% for maize, 50% for rice, and 43% for sesame. And the reason farmers reported to have experienced these reductions in input usage is because they were able to apply these chemicals in a more efficient manner. They were able to plan the timing of their application around rainfall, ultimately reducing the need to reapply chemicals, reducing loss, and ultimately being able to get the same benefit that they would with less usage of these chemicals. So key learnings from this evaluation, there were definitely study design limitations with the low sample size. It was hard to really make any attributions, especially in terms of yield, because only 40 farmers were surveyed. However, one of the major things that we did see was that forecasts can help to reduce the amount of fertilizer and pesticide used in farming activities while still getting the same benefit out of these chemicals. And additionally, one finding was that better coverage of the full farming season should be considered in project design, as many farmers reported that they ultimately did not receive forecasts during the harvesting season, which made things a bit more difficult for them. So now we can take a look at the Ghana impact evaluation, the Hwepe UCL study, University College London. So this is one of the two impact evaluations that we relied heavily on when discussing a lot of these numbers during this webinar. And this evaluation actually surveyed farmers that were subscribed directly to the weather forecast via mobile network operators, meaning that they didn't rely on any organization to subsidize the forecast for them. They were direct paying customers, paying for these forecasts daily. And this evaluation surveyed 397 farmers across Ghana, covered all regions of Ghana, and all of these farmers had been subscribed to ISCA, which is our B2C service, for at least 1 year. So some of the key results that we observed were that 95% of these farmers reported to have made changes to their agricultural practices through proper planning as a result of receiving the forecasts. We also saw significant yield increases, saw a 75% yield increase for maize, 88% for rice, 38% increase for groundnut, and 26% for cassava. So some of the key learnings that we observed is that there was actually a gender yield gap. We saw that men had greater yields. So this kind of informs us that perhaps we need to take a greater consideration for to address gaps especially in terms of technological adaptation among females, as not only was there a yield gap, but we also do have a gap in terms of our user base, in terms of the number of users who are male and the number of users who are female. So it's something that we definitely got some greater insights into through this study and are always working to improve. Another key learning from this evaluation is that smaller landowners, so those who had farms of less than 3 hectares, actually showed a greater percentage yield increase. So it was encouraging to see that these smallholder farmers were actually seeing greater impact, greater improvements in their farming activities than even farmers who have larger farms and more resources. So finally, we will go to the impact evaluation in Nigeria. So this one was related to a 1,400 farmer project in northern Nigeria, focused on the sorghum and onion value chains. The key crops that were evaluated here were sorghum, rice, maize, onion, and garlic. So some of the key results, about 88% of farmers made changes to their agricultural practices. We saw yield increases of about 48% for sorghum, 25% for rice, 35% for maize. And one of the most important ones is that 80% of farmers expressed a willingness to pay for the forecast after their subsidized forecasts end. Some of the key learnings that we obtained from this impact evaluation is that first, farmers are willing to actually pay for the forecast. And we also learned that there does seem to be a limited effectiveness for dry season crops. So as you can see, two of the key crops that we did try to evaluate were onion and garlic, and we ultimately didn't see any significant yield increases. And we did investigate why, and it turns out that not only are these crops that are less reliant on rainfall, but also the forecast period did not really cover the growing period for these crops as well. So it's important. It was an important finding that these forecasts may be more useful during the rainy seasons. So these are just highlighting 3 of the impact evaluations that we've conducted recently. We're constantly evaluating impact. We have a number of other impact evaluations. These are hardly the only ones that we've carried out either ourselves with a project partner or even externally. But these are some important ones that we wanted to share with you today. So as I mentioned, we do try to regularly evaluate impact. So here I want to explain a bit more about how and why we regularly evaluate impact. So we'll kind of discuss the source of data and how we actually collect data, and kind of how we work with our partners to collect data and carry out evaluations and answer key questions that we have. So first, let's start with why we evaluate impact. So ultimately, we are a learning company. Evaluating our services, evaluating our operations is essential to what we do. We're constantly trying to improve, not only in terms of our actually our service delivery to farmers, but also in terms of our forecast accuracy. So while we're very confident in how accurate our service forecasts are, we're consistently making improvements to our forecasting models to ultimately deliver the best forecasts that we possibly can. And evaluating impact, it enables us to make more informed decisions. So it helps us to gain more insights into, what users actually think about our forecasts, not what we think, but what our users think. It helps us to know what we do well, where our biggest strengths are. We also evaluate impact, of course, to know where we need to improve. If farmers aren't utilizing the forecast well in a certain area or for a certain reason, we can make improvements by actually contacting the farmers, getting information from them, and using the information that we collect to make these changes. And also, evaluating impact enables us to help us to get an idea of what we really do offer to farmers and other users. Of course, there's always an idea of what you offer and then a reality. And sometimes there are surprising results, especially in terms of how, how deeply ingrained the forecasts end up becoming in a farmer's practices from the very beginning of the farming cycle all the way to selling. And selling is something that, we may not have been keenly aware of before, but by reaching out to our farmers, by collecting information from our users, we're able to better understand where they find benefit, and then utilizing that information in our activities and being able to better help farmers to benefit from the forecasts. So then evaluating impact and data collection and analysis in general, it's also a key component to our project activities. So we don't just conduct these types of evaluations at the end of projects when they're done. We also do it regularly throughout a season. And this enables us to confirm quality of service delivery, enables us to identify and then address challenges quickly, and not to have problems linger that we didn't even know about until it's too late to even correct them. Evaluating impact is also key for evaluation of project KPIs, knowing if we've met goals that have been set for the project. And this in turn helps us to work with our partners to identify opportunities for continuation of projects, scale up, expansion, and also a very important one, to evaluate the opportunities for sustainability of the impact delivered in a given project. Of course, we don't want to have a project where farmers are provided forecasts for 1, 2, 3 years, and then the project ends, the farmers have benefited in those few years, and then they stop receiving forecasts, and that's where the impact ends. We want to avoid that. And through evaluating impact and through data collection, through talking to these farmers, we can get a better idea of how we can implement sustainability into our project design. So now we'll take a look a little bit in terms of how we actually evaluate impact. So when we have project partners, we offer M&E advisory and support to our project partners. And this can involve anything from simply providing feedback and input on evaluation plans, to kind of use our experience in evaluating impact to help ask the right questions, to be able to properly evaluate the goals both for us and for our project partners. And then we also offer advisory up to the design of the data collection campaigns, helping to carry out the data collection in terms of management of the data collection campaigns, carrying out data analysis on the collected data, and writing reports summarizing the results and reporting on the analysis and reporting on the impact ultimately seen in a project. And we always work directly with our partners to design these M&E campaigns, so that we're not only answering the most relevant questions for us, but that we're able to ask the right questions to answer the most relevant questions for our project partners, and to ultimately identify if a project has met the goals of both us and our partners. Oh, sorry about that. So when we work with our partners to evaluate impact and to just evaluate how projects are going in general, some of the most common things we do include periodic forecast receipt data. So this means that we'll closely monitor the level of receipt for farmers, so we can know how frequently farmers are actually receiving the forecasts to their phones, and also when they are not receiving. And it enables us to easily identify and address any challenges in terms of forecast delivery and receipt. We also will typically suggest conducting a mid-season evaluation, which will happen typically around the middle of the season. And this will be to identify any problems with forecast receipt, to be able to measure how well the farmers are understanding, and then identify how the farmers are actually utilizing the forecasts into their farming practices, and allows both us and the project partner to take action upon these findings if necessary, if there's anything worth addressing. We'll also provide forecast performance analyses. So what this means is that for each of the sites, we can compare the forecasts that were delivered to the farmers and compare these against the actual conditions, the actual rainfall experienced by farmers, and identify how accurate our forecasts were for a given project or even for a given location. And of course, we have the end of season evaluation, which will typically be an all-encompassing evaluation where farmers are asked a series of questions to evaluate impact, to evaluate how farmers are utilizing the forecast, and any impact that they're experiencing through the use of the weather forecasts. So we know that our evaluations aren't ever perfect, but we always do our absolute best to collect data in the most meaningful and also cost-effective way as possible, because we don't want this, because once you raise costs too much, it becomes something that our partners may be less willing to invest resources in, and ultimately we don't get any information. So there's a lot of considerations to be made when we're carrying out impact evaluations, but we always strive to carry out the most robust and effective evaluations as possible, given the circumstances. So of course, there are things that we would love to do with the proper funding, such as an RCT, to truly evaluate impact, to really be able to identify how much of these yield increases, how much of these improvements and outcomes can actually be attributed to the provision of our forecast. So that's something that is certainly always on our radar. But by collecting data and collecting information as frequently and as often as possible, we believe that we're continuing to learn new information. We're continuing to gain better insights into what works well, what doesn't work well, into how farmers use and benefit from forecasts, and at the end of the day, how farmers report to see yield increases, income improvements, cost reductions in their farming activities. So I think this concludes my talking about the smallholder profitability. I hope that this session has been valuable. And now I think it's time for some questions and answers. So please do ask questions. Very happy to hear your questions and to hopefully address them well.
Okay, thank you, Seth. That was a really good one. So the floor is open for all your questions. Fuad Mohammed, would you prefer that I unmute you so you could ask your question? Since you have a question there. Anyone else, please also signify if you would love to drop a question. Okay, Seth, there's a question here. David, I see your question will come next. Moma is asking, do you think the increase in yield because the farmer have an accurate forecasting? Okay, I think person means, do you think the increase in yield is because the farmers have an accurate forecasting or because the farmers know about best practices and know how to adapt the data information?
Sure. So, of course, the yield improvements, they are definitely not fully, we can't fully attribute them to the forecast information based on how we've collected the data. However, I would say that it's definitely both. Of course, if farmers are not receiving correct information, yet they implement that into their farming practices, you know, they won't be able to see improvements. They won't be able to improve their planning around rainfall if they're not actually getting reliable information. At the same time, of course, farmers need to know how to utilize the information that they're receiving into their forecasts. They need to know what activities depend on rainfall and, you know, what the optimal conditions are for making a proper decision for a given farming activity. So it's definitely both. However, I would say that most farmers do know, you know, for example, I mean, almost all farmers do know, for example, how rainfall impacts certain decisions. The problem is more so knowing when that rain is coming or when it's not coming, and being able to plan properly around that. So Moammar, I hope that answers your question, but please let me know if you have any follow-up question.
Okay, our next question will be coming from David. David, could you unmute your mic and speak to us?
Hello.
Hi, David.
Yes, good afternoon to everybody.
Good afternoon.
My question is, do you deliver the messages only in English? And maybe this comes as a suggestion. If it's only in English, maybe you could consider adding some of the local languages to it, because my experience with farmers is that a lot of them are able to relate more with the local language than with the English language. So this comes just as a suggestion to maybe Ignitia's work with delivering messages to farmers.
Yes, of course. So thank you for the question, David. So we do deliver forecasts in right now 4 different languages. We deliver in English, we deliver in French, as well as Hausa and Bambara. So we do deliver in some local languages, not all of them. It is difficult to properly develop the the forecasts in every single language that we can. In addition to the fact that not every language um, has so many people who are actually literate in the language. And one thing that we do in order to keep costs down for our end users is that they're sent in the form of SMS. Um, of course, it will be in an ideal world, we could be delivering these via IVR, via voice message, in every local language possible. But there are cost implications, and ultimately, that cost needs to be offset in some way. So we do provide the written forecast in some local languages where there are higher levels of literacy, and we provide English or French where um, there may not be as high levels of literacy in local languages.
Okay, David, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, thank you. So Seth, there's another question here from Huen. Hope I got the name right. The person says, thanks for your talk, Seth. I was wondering about the willingness of the farmers to pay for the service. Did you manage already to find a group of farmers who are paying themselves for the service, or do you have best approach to reach this? Would this be with partners, direct contacts, or rather as a combination product or bundle with other services like a bank account? I don't know if you get that question, or would you love me
Yeah,
to take it again?
I get it. Yeah, thank you, Ike. And thank you for the question, Glenn. Sorry if I messed up that name. But yeah, so actually, there are a lot of farmers and non-farmers who do pay for the forecasts. So we currently offer our forecasts through mobile network operators in Ghana, in Nigeria, in Burkina Faso, and in Mali. Okay, and we have about 1.3 million users right now who are paying for the forecasts through their airtime. Okay, so they're paying for the forecasts as they receive them. Um, so yes, we have a lot of people who are currently paying for the service. So that is just one approach. Let me hand this off to Andrew to discuss some of these other approaches that you mentioned, if that's all right with you, Andrew.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks, Seth. Wonderful talk. And thank you, Ike, for facilitating and for all the participants on this webinar. So yeah, as Seth said, we're looking across both qualitative and quantitative feedback from customers. These aren't just project beneficiaries. These are paying smallholder farmers, West Africa, most of which are coming from Nigeria, Cote d'Ivoire, Mali, and Burkina Faso. But our forecast model covers from the area of Senegal to Cameroon. And so when we're looking at feedback on how our forecasts are changing farmer behaviors and impacting their livelihoods, mostly by increasing yields and incomes, we look across both the feedback that's coming in from those 1.3 million farmers who are using our forecasts. So those subscribers are essentially giving feedback every single day when we see them paying through their airtime. Most has been through our mobile network operator partnerships. So this is with Orange, MTN, Airtel, and where Ignitia is a service provider to those mobile network operators, which allows those farmers directly as customers. The other types of that you're talking about is more of a, and there, Seth mentioned partnerships we have with non-governmental organizations or implementing organizations where, yeah, we try to learn as much as possible through monitoring and evaluation, surveys, through before-after comparisons, and really try to control for some of those other variables, like you said earlier in the talk on things like adding fertilizer. I think one thing we're looking at going forward is a business-to-business type model where Ignitia is looking for partners. Maybe some of you are on this call now, where we can bundle weather forecast services with other services to farmers. So this could be an input distribution company that's selling seeds or crop protection products or fertilizers that have a vested interest in our information services being used so that those investments a farmer is making in a seed or a fertilizer are going to have the maximum effect on yield. Fertilizer and seeds, you can have the best products in the world, but if you get the timing wrong as a farmer, the yield impact is going to be diminished. And so we really look at what types of industries and partners are aggregating farmers together and where our information service can unlock that investment. I think another part that you talked about was with bank accounts. Yeah, we're looking at microfinance institutions. We're looking at insurers and reinsurers who are looking at helping farmers access inputs by providing some short-term credit products to them and also insuring their farms. One of the themes that came up earlier in the talk is around climate change. And so we know that insurance is going to play a very large part. If you look at northern Nigeria and the flooding that's going on in Jigawa and around Kaduna, that's a major issue. And it's something that unfortunately is only going to be increasing due to climate change and these extreme weather events and weather variability. So we do look at that type of bundling and are looking actively at those types of partnerships, whether it's with a non-governmental organization, an NGO, or an implementing organization that's maybe working on food security issues or helping smallholder farmers improve their yields and market access. We're looking for those types of partnerships. And then we're also looking at partnerships with agribusiness stakeholders, and that can be, like I said, input distribution companies, it can be warehousing and logistics companies, or it can be more of the service providers like a bank or an insurer. Hope that helps.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. For those who don't know or who have not read it in the comments, Andrew is our Chief Strategy Officer at Ignitia. Thanks for that contribution, Andrew. There's a comment here from Fuad. It reads, I am in admiration of Ignitia for providing private weather information to farmers. There seems to be a lack of coordination between weather and agronomic information so farmers can appreciate effects of weather on their crops. Thank you so much, Fuad. Thank you. And there's another question coming in from David. It says, would you consider adding good agronomic practices to the messages you deliver to farmers? Would you consider providing custom-made messages for specific groups of farmers? Seth, are you taking this, or would Andrew do that?
I think Andrew may be better able to answer this.
Yeah, sure. So one thing Seth mentioned that's really important is this idea of conveying actionable information to smallholder farmers. And so as he said, smallholder farmers know what to do with rainfall information. It's something that if you get the accuracy high enough, which our model does, and you can get it to a timely and easy to understand and digest way, which we've done through over 120 different trials to be able to convey complex forecast information into a bite-sized SMS message delivered to the farmer on a morning, daily basis, then that farmer knows how to adjust their planting practices, or when to apply fertilizer, or when to harvest and dry. And so those are some of the important connections where we've been able to distill that complex forecast information down to a piece of weather information that allows that farmer to change his or her on-farm and off-farm practices. Now, when you come to advisory messages, this is where things get a little complex. We know that farmers want advisory messages like ideal planting date, or when to spray or not spray. If they are involved in some kind of commodities like cocoa or cashew, then drying is a large part of what they do. Same thing with some staple crops like sorghum. So here, the challenge for many technology service providers like Ignitia is to match what seeds and varietals are those farmers using, because not all are going to have the same length of growing season. Not all are going to be as drought tolerant. So we really need to work with an agribusiness partner so that we can provide those advisory messages that are demanded by the farmers. And so we are currently testing a new service that we've just rolled out through Ojo. So the service that Seth has talked about during this session is ISCA, SMS rainfall forecast that's delivered to those customers across West Africa. But as we work with agribusinesses, to your point, David, there's a lot of interest in these advisory alerts. And so Ojo has an alert system now where we're able to set thresholds. So for example, if the wind speed is high and temperature is above a certain degree, and let's say the chance of rainfall is high, then maybe we need to send an alert out via SMS or email to an agronomist or a service provider that says now is not an ideal time for farmers to spray or apply fertilizer. It's just one step further in us nudging good agricultural practices so that just like rainfall adjusts practices for an individual smallholder farmer, we think input providers or service providers and extension agents equipped with advisory messages can help them to plan with their networks of farmers what types of practices. But again, the challenge is around the value chains that are being selected. It's around the types of varietals that have been selected and the specific application for that agribusiness, whether it's a processing challenge, a sustainable sourcing challenge, a drying challenge, or let's say an input application challenge. So yeah, we are open to those partnerships. We have a couple trials ongoing in a couple different industries. For example, input distributors, fertilizer company where we're developing 3 to 5 key advisory messages to be sent out to their farmer networks. Hope that helps.
Yes, there is another question. Thank you, Andrew. There's another question from Chris. Chris is asking, how about developing API for other companies that want to integrate your forecast to their services?
Sure, I can take this one too, Seth, if that's okay. So yeah, we also have an API available. The API can communicate rainfall information or other weather parameters. So if you're looking for like moisture budget, aridity index, or evapotranspiration, we can certainly do that. That all features as part of our our tropical weather forecasting model. Now, it just depends on the application. Sometimes there's an existing platform, like a traceability platform or a precision agriculture platform, where weather services are a complement to those services that are being provided on the digital platform. So we're happy to create a business and technical model integration where we can provide improved weather information to feed that digital platform. So feel free to reach out to myself or others the other members of the Ignitia team here if you are interested in looking at what an API could do for your platform.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. Any more questions? I think we still have about 5 minutes before we have to go. If typing is taking too long, you could just raise a hand and I would see the notification. Okay, seems all questions have been addressed and it is time to close it up. Thank you everyone for attending. Thank you, Seth, for being with us. Thank you, Andrew, for being available to answer some very key questions here. We really appreciate your presence. If you have any more questions, maybe you want to make inquiries after this webinar, feel free to either check out our website or send us an email via info@ignitia.se. The email is right on your screen right now, or you could also reply any of the reminder emails you got for this webinar with your inquiries and further questions. We'll be glad to address those. Thank you once again for joining us on this webinar. Till next time, goodbye.
All right, thank you everyone.